what makes a well-designed wine label, or labels in general. And it's actually a question that I contemplate on a regular basis, spending a lot of time in retail stores and working on labels for all kinds of things. And it's a harder question than I thought when he asked me last week. So anyway, I'm gonna give it my best shot, share some of the things that I kind of found research-wise and some of the considerations that we make when we're designing labels. So we're a relatively small firm. We have about 24 people based in Denver. And we do a lot in the beverage industry, but in other industries as well. So in the beverage side, some of the brands we work with, New Belgium is probably the biggest of the batch. We've worked with them for over 10 years, designing labels, designing ads, videos, logos, packaging, all kinds of stuff, promotions, POS, hundreds of projects a year, and we're not the only group they work with. So the volume of stuff that New Belgium does pretty much is more than all of these other ones combined. Great Divide, which you guys may know from Denver. So we do a lot in the beer industry. Breckenridge, prior to their sale to InBev, we did a dozen, 15 years worth of work for them. Thumb Keg, which was a little experimental Diageo kind of small brand that launched in 3 markets. So I got to see the inner workings of the Diageo machine, which was interesting. Daredevil, startup in Indiana. Southern Tier, one of the largest breweries I never heard of in upstate New York and Buffalo. And they have a distillery now too, which I'll show you an image of. They launched this year. Replica, if you're familiar with these guys, it's kind of an entrepreneurial, venture capital funded wine experiment. Guinness, we've done work for. We've done a few things for Ben. We work with the Brewers Guild. We helped rebrand a little winery affiliated with Replica called the Great Oregon Wine Company. And we've even working with a brewery in Hong Kong. A couple Americans in Hong Kong actually that bought a brewery. So packaging, I think you'll just see from a handful of images that I'm going to show you, the styles range dramatically, and we'll get a lot into this. This was a collaboration pack that New Belgium did with other breweries that was hugely popular last fall. They sold all of these out. The beers in them were really great, actually. And it was, these collaboration things in the beer industry are very, very common, where I'm convinced that brewers just get together and have a beer, and then someone makes a beer and it's suddenly a collaboration. They all sprinkled magic dust in the top of the kettle and call it a collaboration beer. But they had other breweries, which are really some of their competitors and friends, all collaborate on this pack. So it's kind of the spirit of the craft brewery, or at least the way it used to be. And this was last year, but as things get more competitive, I think collaboration seems to wane. So this is a brewery, like I mentioned, in Buffalo, New York, that is pretty big. They do over 100,000 barrels, which puts them in the top 50. They just merged with another brewery called Victory, and now a holding company kind of has the two of them. And their philosophy was, well, we really like beer, but we also drink other stuff. So they wanted to open their own distillery. And these guys are prolific. They put out more SKUs in a year than I think any brewery I've ever seen. Like, I think they have 9 IPAs this year that they have packaged in the market. They just crank out SKUs all the time. Most of it's sold in upstate New York and the neighboring, like Pittsburgh and sort of those neighboring cities. They're kind of the local favorite. Random piece of trivia, at the Buffalo Bills Stadium, their double IPA was like the top selling non-domestic beer at the stadium. And I was like, what? People are drinking like 10% alcohol IPAs at a football game?
Cold.
Apparently in Buffalo, people do the ABV calculation and figure for the price, it was the best value for the amount of alcohol that they were getting, and they were flying through it. Plus, it's a beer town, so it's kind of interesting. These are the guys in Hong Kong. They had a couple names, and then we redid the whole system, and gave them a new brand, new logo, new packaging, pretty much everything. When they bought the brewery, they bought like a couple pieces of equipment, came with one person who was doing all the work by himself, and a couple trademarks, and I think also a couple $1 million in tax losses. So they're not going to pay taxes for a long time, but they're doing quite well. One guy in Singapore who runs it, and then one guy in New York who funds it. So it's kind of an interesting entrepreneurial endeavor. Couple of recent cans for Great Divide. These are kind of special release cans. This one, they wanted to print the can and use it for multiple years because it's kind of a small batch and the minimums are kind of high for printing cans at Ball, if any of you have ever looked into that. So this way, they're going to switch the hops out every year, make a new beer, but get hopefully 3 years worth out of the can run that they did. And then their fresh hop is a seasonal beer that they do as well. So we do a lot of cans. In fact, Ball, printing on cans is harder than you think. Just the limitations are really kind of painful, and printing it to make it look good on a can is harder than at least I would have thought. So Ball calls us all the time when breweries submit art that isn't going to work. They're like, can you call these guys and help them fix their labels? And usually we'll give them a couple pointers, but going in and changing someone else's stuff isn't really the kind of work we want to do, but apparently it's a big problem. This was a experimental brand that we launched. We tested it, or they tested it in New York, in Austin, and Nashville with no marketing support. They just put it on tap, put it in some liquor stores, and tried to see how it would do. The story of this brewery was it was gonna, because it's Diageo, but no one really knows that from looking at it. It was a brewery that collaborates with distilleries to make different beers. And so we did two, one with Peligrosa tequila, using the same agave that they use in the beer. And then this one was with Dickel, where they used the mash from Dickel and made a beer out of it. And it actually did surprisingly well, to the point where they canceled the project because it was starting to become a conflict with selling in some of their Guinness Blonde handles that they were selling at the time. And some executive in Connecticut was like, why are we wasting time with this tiny little thing when we have bigger problems of making sure Guinness is successful? So after a 3-month run where it was outperforming Guinness Blonde in all 3 of those markets where they were in retail together, they killed it. So there you go. So the cans for Ben, I think, probably came the same way through Ball, where whatever cans that they were working on weren't going to print. So we took over the designs of those, went through millions of variations, and this is what Ben ended up going with, which is pretty similar to what he had. But actually these, you can tell that there's wine in them. His earlier designs, people were pretty confused by whether it was wine or not, just because wine in a can is relatively new, and the artwork was relatively complicated and a little confusing, so we at least wanted to make sure people knew that there was wine in the cans. Apparently still an issue on Frontier, although they've probably getting used to it now, is the lids, because that's what they see when they're in the trays, is the lids of all of them. So they still have trouble differentiating between the different varietals, because the flight attendants are looking down on them and have to pull them out to check them. But doing each lid custom to be different colors or something was also cost prohibitive. So lots of packaging challenges that we work through. So if you haven't encountered these guys yet, there's a company called Integrated Beverage Group in town, and this is their experiment. And they have a lab that's a separate entity that was doing wine testing. And then they, with winemakers, and it ties somehow back to the Great Oregon Wine guys, are trying to create similar wines to very popular mass-produced wines and trying to replicate them, at least from a series of characteristics. So I think they have like 20 different data points of different flavor profiles. And so the strategy of this was to go after the millennials that really don't care and just want a better value for their everyday bottles of wine. And so these names are intentionally cheeky, and the first letter matches the wine that they're replicating so that they get shelved similarly. So like Pickpocket is the attempt at trying to match Prisoner. And so, yeah, they're probably on different shelves, but at least they're in the same ballpark. So these guys are funded by a private equity company called Juggernaut Capital, and I think it's a grand experiment. I haven't checked in with them recently to see how they're doing, but I see it around. And they've gotten some pretty decent scores lately, and again, I don't understand the whole world of wine scoring, but they're a very aggressive entrepreneurial wine company in Denver. This is one of their other brands, the Great Oregon Wine Company, that they kind of wanted to have a few things that were a little higher end. And so these pretty simple design, just a couple little more of a classic look, but then they're also experimenting with cans, and these are the smaller cans. Ben does the 250 milliliter can, and these are the more traditional. I think they're like 175 or 187 or whatever that legal size is. So the question that we ask ourselves all the time as designers is, do people really buy wine just based on the label? And it's sort of one of those cliches out there in the industry that I tried to find data points to try and back up. And there's a few out there. So shockingly, there's very little, at least public research, other than maybe what Gallo and some of the big holding companies do and don't release. And I'll show you a couple Gallo things that you probably have seen. But so the question is, do people really buy on the label? And this was a study from 2015. They took 1,000 people and they asked them to check all the things that apply. So what was most important to them? Price was at the top of the list, brand, varietal, country, and label. So in this survey, 24% of the people said when making a decision on which wine to buy, I usually consider check all that apply, label is on there. So a quarter of the time they admit that they buy it on the label. That was the study. It's pretty high. This is that Gallo Trends study from 2015, where millennials, if they start to divide this up, and they have a little slideshow that I just pulled a couple slides out of. So millennials are 4 times more likely than baby boomers to select a bottle of wine based on its label. They're also more likely to look for personality, originality. Baby boomers, region of origin, taste descriptions as being there. Then other factors that encourage wine drinkers to try something new: 95% recommendation by a family or friend or coworker, 86% recommended by a server, bartender, sommelier in a restaurant, 82% recommendation of an employee at the local wine store. I know from my own wine buying experience, at retail especially, if a salesperson actually, if you don't say sorry, I'm just looking, or you get rid of them, they're gonna try and put something in your cart. Now who they work for is a whole nother question. A lot of them work for distributors, and they have ulterior motives, but they're pretty good at it. I've fallen for it. I see it all the time. You know, if you go to a liquor store and you stand around long enough, you're gonna see how effective of a sales strategy it is of getting people to put things in their carts, because as you guys know, this industry is confusing. There's so many products. It's so hard to be educated, which we'll get to in another slide, that if someone tells you what to do and it's in your price point, you're probably gonna do it. Which gets back to the relationship with the retailers and the distributors and how important that is, which I would say is probably more important than the label, despite the rest of the presentation being about labels. So 51% new wine if it was recommended on social media. I think, and this was 2015, it's probably higher now. So this was another article that I pulled up about how people are basically looking for cute labels, especially millennials. One of the questions that I'll ask you later is, who's your audience? Like, who you're trying to sell your wine to? Because if you're not trying to sell to millennials or you don't care, then a lot of this stuff doesn't matter. But if you are, or if you look at the future of the changing demographics, pretty important big group. So, you know, no surprise, people want their wines to look good, they want them to taste good. You know, this writer from The Eater took a bunch of, I think it's her friends, out to go wine shopping. And they're all people that enjoy wine, like wine, buy wine, but aren't like wine enthusiasts who really know wine. They're just kind of your everyday wine buyers. And took them shopping and basically like asked them lots of questions on what they chose, why they chose it. And the conclusion was none of them really knew a whole lot about wine, and they ended up buying a lot of wine based on image, based on what they saw and what they liked. They couldn't really remember wines that they liked in the past. They basically weren't very good at, so these are not great consumers because they don't really know, but this is probably the majority of the people who just go to a wine shop looking to buy something and are going to walk out with something that catches their eye. And so it was kind of a eye-opening, at least for the writer, but then they all became kind of design critics of looking for wines that they thought looked good. So one of the things that is the opposite is a lot of the wine buyers, who are the ones deciding what goes on the shelves, they don't like this kind of approach. You know, they want it to look, or at least a lot, and I've talked to a bunch of them, they want it to be more traditional. They don't like these gimmicks. They feel like this is like not what this industry was supposed to be about, is marketing gimmicks or like design tricks. So there would probably be even more kind of kitschy wine packaging out there if the wine buyers were less traditional. So I think while the wine buyers are still kind of the old guard of wanting things to look professional and sophisticated and legit, then I think if you go to the nicer wine shops, you see more of the more traditional labels. And I think I'll mention Target later. Go look at the wine selection in Target. For the most part, they're the coolest wine labels you're gonna see. Now, are they good wines? I don't know. But they curate really cool labels there. And because they know that wine buyer who's just strolling down the aisle in Target is gonna get caught on the impulse buy and is gonna grab something based on the image more so than the substance. And there's probably some occasion they're going to, or for their own, you know, consumption, where that's okay. They're not there to study. They're there to just buy something. And Target's really good at getting you to buy stuff. So you could see the quote from a wine buyer, like, I don't need kitsch, I don't need cupcakes, I don't need puppy dogs on the front label. I need something that's relevant, respectful of the winery it's coming from. So there's these kind of two opposing forces that I think are dominating the wine industry, from at least my observation, that we can get into more. So another stat, 71% are swayed by what's on the label. I don't know what their study was. And women, again, these are huge stereotypes, prefer more creative, eye-catching, colorful, ornate wine labels than men. Similarly, women rated plain, less colorful logo lower in attractiveness than men. Wineries have used this kind of data to create wines targeted specific to female drinkers. Middle sister, cupcake, girls' night out, mommy juice, etc. So, does quality design equal higher price? So, play this game with yourself. I do it every time I go to a wine store. I look through the aisles and I try and pick out wines that I think are going to be expensive based on the labels. And my conclusion is it's not a very good way to even judge price, because as you'll see, like design techniques and production techniques on nicer labels aren't that expensive anymore. Like, design has become so accessible that one of the quotes that I read from a Napa wine marketing firm that just does wine labels in Napa, they said the number one request that they get is for their designs to make the wine look more expensive than it is. So if you're comparing two wines together and one looks nicer or looks more expensive than the other, I think the strategy is consumers are probably going to pick the one that looks better if they don't really know. So I think a very common, like I picked up a couple bottles of wine that I could tell some really good designer designed the labels for, and they were like $7 or $9. And then I'm looking at them like, they spent a lot of money on this label, but if they're mass producing it at high volume, probably that label wasn't any more expensive, or it's probably less expensive than what you guys are paying for your labels. So now they have a nice, really well-designed label with high finish for a cheap bottle of wine. And it's causing a ton of confusion. And so this is becoming a more and more tricky game as there's more and more design that's out there. So my conclusion of this is I have no idea. Like, I'm wrong as much as I'm right on just looking at labels, walking around the aisles on which ones I think are going to be expensive. Now, the shelving, of course, you know, the stores that shelve the more expensive ones at the top and the cheaper ones at the bottom, there's all those cues, but if you're just looking at the labels, it's harder than you think. So my educated guess is that the nicer labels are, in a lot of cases, wines that are probably lower quality but are trying to look better to overcome that objection. I have no idea if this is a good wine or not. So, and you can see there's just so many bottles. And the more you learn about private label, the more you learn that there might be the same wine with 4 different labels in the same store, and it's confusing, and the distributors have their own labels, and it gets complicated fast. And so the consumer has no chance. Like, they really have no chance, which is why I think so much influence happens from the salespeople, is because as a layman who's not a wine expert, you walk into a wine shop, it's pretty overwhelming in most places. So this whole feature here in the middle, that mythical under $15 magical price point of where most people make, I think, a lot of uneducated decision making, is at that $15 price point where it's like, you know, it's not enough money that it's gonna make a huge difference. So again, just trying to look at the variety and style, and you know, these are like someone hired an artist and made these labels, and it's $12. This brand right here, I think has some of the coolest labels, and they do this extra little bag, and there's a agency that I'll give you the name of at the end called Stranger and Stranger. They're in New York and London. They're the most badass packaging designers out there, probably. They design that, and it's not an expensive wine. It's just a lot of bells and whistles to try and get people to pull it off the shelf. I think these are all Target. Yeah. From what I understand, Chime, I think, is packaged under 3 or 4 different labels. So, again, shelving here at Target, they don't do the most expensive on the top all the time. But this was before they moved in, at least the Glendale store, where they moved into their own little shop over there now with their license change. But so one of my conclusions is that just finding good designers is a lot easier to do now. You know, there's websites like 99 Designs where you can host competitions and have designers from all over the world, you know, for a relatively low amount of money, contribute designs, and then you pick one and you award the job and the fee, that reward to that designer. So even if that's, again, bad for my industry, but even if you just wanted to get some ideas, like putting a whatever dollar amount reward on a contest to 99 Designs and seeing what people come up with is a really cheap way to get ideas. Now, I could tell you lots of stories where people have done that and then they come to us and ask them to fix it because it's not going to print or it doesn't work, or, you know, but forgetting all that kind of insider industry stuff, there's other sites like that where it's just designers from around the world with free time. And a lot of them are in other countries where the $500 reward or whatever prize you put on that contest is a lot of money. So, you know, it's all relative, but if you're gonna try and do something, and this is more the insider, like, don't tell anyone in my industry that I'm recommending this, because it's, but it's a pretty cool thing to experiment with, and it's a lot cheaper than we are. Might not work, but it might. I think the key here, though, is that design is probably the most subjective thing out there. So the labels that I like, and that might get me to pick it off the shelf, you guys are probably gonna hate them, or at least some of you. And the ones that you love that mean something to you, I might not pick up. So again, that's what makes this really a tough question to answer, is what makes it well designed. And we'll go through some questions. But it's harder than you think to have a decisive answer. So, like, I think this is an awesome looking bottle. I'd probably buy it just on the package. Others of you might be like, I would never buy that. Like, why would I want, you know, maybe, I don't know. It's professionally designed, fun little illustration, kind of retro, seems summery, going to a pool party, maybe. Again, technique, that outer box, someone spent a lot of time and money on that box. Is it gonna get you to buy it?
But it's gonna make an impression in that floor stack.
Yep.
Right to the floor stack.
Box wine. Like, for the right audience, someone's gonna love this. Like, that retro, cool, kind of reinventing box wine to not be something that looks totally crappy. I think there's
including cups in that packaging. That's
I think you'll see another one where they're including cups too. Yeah. I think it slides in that. I think it slides in that side.
And when at the party, you show them the drink.
Like, it's really beautiful, and part of it's photography. If you're gonna spend money, you know, yeah, get a good label, but get someone professional to shoot the bottles, because, or at least renders. Like, most of the time when we show, like, the photos that you saw in the beginning of our packaging, all those are renderings. None of those are real photos, I don't think, because they look so much better than the real thing. You know, you can control everything in Photoshop, where real photography has a lot of limitations. I don't even know what this is, but I would probably, if I were going to a dinner party, I might like pick it up. Some simple ones, but still cool type, little system. The rules in wine labels too are pretty lax. So like the number of labels that I see these days, which goes against a lot of retail strategies, like I don't know what that is. And unless you turn the bottle around and look to see what it is, or a tag or a hang tag or something, but there's hundreds of bottles that the front label has absolutely nothing on it. So there's something there. It might,
Pick it off the shelf.
or people walk right by it because they have no idea what it is. And I think there's different buyers that have different behaviors, and so which of their, where are there more of them? But it's a cool illustration. This one, a packaging award. It's Australian, some kind of collaboration. I guarantee you the packaging costs way more than whatever's inside of it, but it's be a nice gift. This is another one that won a recent packaging award, where the label has an entire little storybook that's tied up around it. Like, you can go nuts with packaging for sure. This is a cool looking series. They never get displayed like this, sadly, except in the website of the agency that did it. And when everyone's going one way, there's certainly strategies in going the other way, where I'm sure someone spent at least 10 minutes on this, kind of writing out the story. And I don't think this is an inexpensive bottle of wine either. If I remember correctly, it's somewhere in the upper 20s. And it's just a handwritten little note, printed cool, and trying to be different. You know, some more graphic, simple. I think these are silk screened on the bottle, but I can't quite tell. And the other thing that I'm seeing a ton of is just new formats. I think everyone's just trying to break tradition, or not everyone. A small group of people are trying to break tradition and make a lot of noise doing it. I think it's probably the more accurate. So like these wine pouches, I think are really cool. There's got to be an occasion for this. I think there was one that was called like the Bagnum, which was like the Magnum of bags, where there are these, you know, people are having fun with it, and you know, they're getting tons of press. Now, are people buying them? I don't know. I don't have that sales data to see if it's working, but it's certainly causing media attention.
Just as an example, people up in the Grand Valley who are doing bags sell a ton of them to rafters, and bicyclists who don't want to collect bottles around.
Yep. And the cans are trying to play into that same market of these occasions where glass is just so inconvenient, which probably aren't that many of, but it's a good. But these bags are pretty well designed, I'd say, for the right buyer that's looking for something different. I think they're pretty cool. So, Paperboy, if you've ever seen this one, it's kind of a bag inside a cardboard bottle. So I bought one just because I thought it was so cool. That same agency, the one from New York and London, did it. And it's like a clamshell cardboard bottle, and inside is a bladder. And the idea was, which I'm sure no one has ever done, that you can somehow you could recycle all the parts, but then I don't know if you could buy refillable interiors. I haven't seen them sold, but I think that was sort of the possibility of that packaging solution. It's a really cool, I'd say, gimmick, but it's neat, and it won a ton of design awards. You know, Underwood, the cans, and this is that really big can, that 375. It's a lot of wine. But I also find that when you drink out of a can, you can drink it surprisingly fast, which may not be what their intentions are. You know, some might look at this, like our designers look at this and they're like, this is perfect. You know, it's so simple, it looks great. And then other people are like, that looks like beer, that looks horrible. Like, what? I would never buy that. I would never drink wine out of a can. And everyone's right. You know, some people will never buy this. But I guarantee you they sell a ton of this.
Yeah, they're over 100,000 cases, 300,000.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't know the numbers from Ben, but I'm sure he moves more cans than he does bottles. But again, is it because it's novelty? You know, when there's 100 new canned wines in 2018, is it still going to be that way? I don't know. We'll find out. Sorry, this is a little blurry, but this is another one where that top part is a glass, like a plastic cup that was packed with each one, which I thought was a nice packaging solution. And just sort of the redesigning of box wines and those, what are those called, like Tetra Paks? Again, I don't know the sales data, but there's a lot of people making an effort to try and make wine more accessible for different occasions. I think some of the occasions invented occasions where I don't know that it's really a problem, but the marketers are making it a problem, of all those times where bottles are just so inconvenient. But there must be something there. And I think the box wines, like, obviously there's a value story there too, because it's a quantity at a price usually.